All right, let's get started here. Um, so we're going to be using today. We're going to be using the Lionfish platform here to go over our controls. The best part of the Lionfish platform is that it keeps track of tasks, schedule, evidence, and it gives you a good breakdown of what each of the controls are and explains briefly what they mean, and you can kind of glean from that what you need to do for the control. But I'm going to give you additional insights into each of the controls today. That's what this class is about. Um, we're going to go over SOC 2 compliance, and we're currently in risk assessment, the risk assessment module. So we're going to talk about that and move forward with the rest of it. But I would use the Lionfish platform to accomplish all my goals, and that's a plug for this particular product. All right. Security risk analysis. The entity specifies objectives with sufficient clarity to enable the identification and assessment of risks relating to objectives. So, Jeremy and I have, and you can use our risk assessment package. We have a little risk assessment approach, risk methodology, risk assessment checklist. All the different risk items are in there, and you can use those to identify risk and properly deal with it. Have a risk assessment every quarter or every year. The entity identifies risks to the achievement of its objectives across the entity and analyzes risks as a basis for determining how the risk should be managed. Again, our risk package can help you get through this part. You want to identify risks that will affect your objectives. And what are your objectives? Your objectives are your business goals. Your business is maybe a manufacturing firm. You're manufacturing chips, or you're manufacturing a component for a piece of equipment, and that's your objective. So what are the risks to the fact that you may have to, experience some sort of a problem in relation to your objective? So if you're trying to make a component and supply chains are slowing you down from achieving those goals, then you would identify that as a risk, and then you would have a risk and a meeting, and you would determine what to do in the event that a risk occurred. That could be switching to a different provider. That could be stockpiling uh, things, stuff like that. So you want to analyze the risk, how it's going to affect your business objectives, which are your business goals, which are how to stay in, excuse me, how to stay in business. The entity considers the potential for fraud in assessing risk to the achievement of objectives. Fraud is committed by humans. Fraud is not committed by computers. Fraud is not committed most likely by a vendor, or fraud isn't really committed by a particular group or entity. It's committed by a person. So when they talk about this, how are you going to assess the risk of fraud by an individual in your organization from achieving your objectives? So if you're trying to make that component and somebody is stealing or lying about the availability of a material, that is fraud. And so or someone's submitting timesheets that they're not working, or there's so many 40 hours or overtime and they're not working that, and that's and you're not producing as many of the components as you need, because even though the person's supplying you with hours that aren't being worked, so that's fraud. So you have to come up with some sort of an assessed risk for that. Assess the risks of fraud being committed by another person in your organization. you can run through a variety of different scenarios about fraud, but fraud's always committed by a person. The entity identifies and assesses changes that could significantly impact the system or internal control. If you had a device that made that component that we were talking about earlier, and it was in risk, I know a company that has a particular metal pressing machine, and that machine is the core of their business. And if that particular machine were to go down, they can basically can't produce their product. So they have to understand what to do in the event that that particular system or machine goes down, and you come up with some sort of a risk assessment, and then what you're going to do in the event that machine is out of service or for a prolonged period of time. Or if somebody in your organization were to leave and they had critical knowledge, what would you do? So these are all just scenarios you create. You create a risk assessment or risk plan, and then you just go over, like, you got to create this thing called an incident report. And that report, you come up with these risks that you identify. You say, oh, hey, John left the company. He has proprietary knowledge. What are we going to do? And then everyone sits around and brainstorms about it, and you come up with an incident response plan. So the events that occur that are risks are called incidents. So if you have a risk that, a component can't be made, and if the machine goes down, and then you say to your group, okay, let's have an incident response exercise, and you say, okay, the machine goes down, what do we do? And then you document the incident, and you store it in here as evidence. The entity selects, develops, and performs ongoing or separate evaluations to ascertain whether the components of internal control are present and functional. So you're going to go through and you're going to do some sort of a policy audit. So this is what you're going to run as an audit of your policies. So you're going to say, like, if, for instance, an internal control could be your password policy. And your password policy could say, you have to have a 9-10 letter password. It has to have capital letters, has to have symbols. And when you go to log in, if you type in ABC123 and it lets you in, then that control is not working. So you want to just do an audit of the control and say, okay, look, I have to type in this password. Here's a message that comes up from the system when I go to reset it. If I don't do it properly, it's going to tell me your password strength isn't high enough, and therefore it aligns with the policy. So you're wanting to have the policy, but you also want to have it be enforced. And if it's not being enforced, then it's not. You're going to evaluate and ascertain that it's not, a functioning internal control. So have internal controls like a password policy, and then have something that makes sure that it gets enforced. The system itself will allow you to set it parameters that will make it so that passwords have to maintain a certain level of your controls basis. So you need to do that. The entity evaluates and communicates internal control deficiencies in a timely manner to those parties responsible for taking corrective action, including senior management and the board of directors. So if you have a password policy and you don't have a system or internal mechanism that would enforce it, and it is not being enforced, it's not working, you're going to want to call that out as a when you do your audit of those internal controls from the previous control. You're going to call it out, and you're going to tell everyone in your organization. You want to communicate it to them, document the communication. You want to tell the people like your IT department the password policy is not enforceable through the mechanisms that we have. Like when I go to reset it, it lets me choose anything I want. And then you would also include the senior managers, and it would be a deficiency item when you have your board of directors meeting. When you have your board of directors meeting, you want to have a section in there for controls, where you talk about if you're compliant with all your controls, if all your controls are adequate, if they're functional, and if they're being appropriately implemented. You should also have a ticketing system where you create these deficiencies in the ticketing system in your organization. You call them out and you assign them to a responsible party. The entity selects and develops control activities that contribute to the mitigation of risk to the achievement of objectives to acceptable levels. So you want to have audits, you want to have incident response activities, you want to have baseline, you want to check the baseline of your environment on a regular basis. I would say every 6 months is an adequate amount of time. You can do it more often, but it will just produce no results if you do it like every month, because you've already identified your risks and you've already identified what you need to do to mitigate those risks. So if you're just doing that every month, you're just going to keep rolling over on the same item. So you want to do it every 6 months to a year. You want to run an audit of your environment, have an independent person do the audit. In my opinion, I wouldn't do it myself. There's nothing better than an extra set of eyes or a third party that's not invested in your environment, that won't skip over things. I would have a third party auditor, like an IT company, MSP, or something like that, go through and look at all of your controls, and also check out your risk methodology, risk analysis, and make sure that the risks that you've identified in your risk analysis document are being mitigated by controls, the appropriate controls. The entity deploys control activities through policies and establishes what is expected and in procedures that put policies into action. Basically, what I just said before, that you have that you look at your risks, that you look at your control set, that it is in place, that you're moving towards a specific goal, and that you have policies and procedures for all of your different objectives, password policy, encryption policy, mobile device policy, access control policy, third party hardware software policy, vendor policy, all these different policies and procedures you're going to have that are appropriate, for your company. You're going to want to make sure that they are deployed and working, and that they're functional. You could usually use the third party auditor will go and tell you which ones aren't working and which ones need to be put into place. The entity implements logical access security software, infrastructure, and architecture over protected information assets to protect them from security events to meet the entity's objectives. Logical access security software. That is like multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication, password login. So it's going to be computer-based identity software. AAA is a protocol that you can use. LDAP, all these different, SAML. There are all these different logical access security software products. You can choose which one you want to use against your infrastructure, but it needs to be adequately able to secure your environment, and also create a log item entry for each of the times that a security event, like a login or a failed login, occurs. So you're going to want to have it so that you have something that produces logs. Prior to issuing system credentials and granting system access, the entity registers and authorizes new internal and external users whose access is administered by the entity. For those users whose access is administered by the entity, user system credentials are removed when user access is no longer authorized. So you're going to want to have something called an onboarding document, and that onboarding document is shared through the HR and IT departments. In the onboarding document, you're going to want to identify the username and groups they belong to. And then in those groups, you're going to want to identify in your documentation the access that those groups have to the system, and that when you onboard somebody, you have particular areas of your environment that someone needs to get access to, can be signed off by managers in those departments. And then once those managers sign off on the access control request, that you grant access to those particular areas. It could be folders, it could be machines, it could be rooms, it could be a room that you get your badge access to, et cetera, et cetera. And then when you are move on to another position in the company, or you move to another area where it doesn't require access, or you're terminated or you quit, you're going to have an offboarding document. And in that offboarding document, you're going to remove that person from those particular groups that have authorization to access those particular areas or folders or whatever. And you want to keep track of all this data in your onboarding and offboarding documents, and you're going to want to keep those documents fresh and handy for an auditor in the event that somebody wants to see how you grant access to particular areas logically. The entity authorizes, modifies, or removes access to data, software functions, and other protected information assets based on roles, responsibilities, or the system design, and changes giving consideration to the concept of least privileges and segregation of duties to meet the entity's objectives. Again, you're going to have that group. That group's going to have membership. And inside that group, you can have roles and responsibilities. The roles could be managers, could be system administrators, could be power users, and or just regular end users. When you create these roles, you're going to want to create the principle of least privilege. So if you are a user, you shouldn't have the power to change passwords of other users. If you're a power user, you might have the ability to add printers, but not add network shares or access folders that you normally wouldn't access. You want to make sure that everybody gets only the powers they need in order to do their job. And those powers need to be tied to their role. And those roles need to be set inside of the group. And that group needs to have access granted by the particular group owner or manager or whoever it is that gives out access to those particular groups for those powers. The entity restricts physical access to facilities and protected information assets. For example, data center facility, backup media, and other sensitive locations, to authorize personnel to meet the entity's objectives. Your objectives are in this environment is to stay secure. Your objective is not to build the component. In this scenario, your objective is to stay secure. So what you want to do is you want to have card key access or locked doors with keys that only certain people have, or areas that you have escort people to, and so on and so forth. You restrict that by using cameras, locked doors, car key badge access, and you want to only allow people into those areas that are authorized to go in those areas. You want to describe all of this in your physical access control policy. You want to say, look, building B is accessible only by people who belong to group engineering. Engineering group has a particular badge code that allows them to get into building B. Anybody who's not in building B cannot access building B. There's a no tailgating policy, so no one can just slip into the door after that kind of thing. Everyone has to badge in, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to make sure that you have physical safeguards in your environment that disallow access to your facilities by non-authorized individuals. The entity discontinues logical and physical protections over physical access only after the ability to read or recover data and software from these assets has been diminished and is no longer required to meet the entity's objectives. What they're really talking about here is storage devices, laptops that you might use in a communal environment, or a particular physical you know hard drive or a USB drive or something like that. If you can access it physically, you want to make sure that it's in a secure area, and that if someone wants to put that USB stick into something and recover data from it, you make sure that that's not allowed in your environment, and that that's not something that you're capable of doing. You want to make sure that you keep all those things locked away in a cabinet, and you want to make sure that no one has access to things that they can grab and recover data from, and that you destroy or disable or wipe that particular information from those assets after you're finished using them. The entity implements logical access security measures to protect against threats from sources outside its system boundaries. This is, firewalls, um, access points for Wi-Fi that are encrypted, that are tied to your identity engine, that might require certificates to access. You want to use software, firewalls, and so on and so forth to protect your information from attack from the outside. So this is talking about also doors, you know, locked doors, security cameras. You want to make sure that outside threats are unable to access your information in any way, shape, or form. The entity restricts the transmission, movement, and removal of information to authorized internal and external users and processes, and protects it during transmission, movement, or removal to meet the entity's objectives. What they're talking about here is something called DLP, data loss prevention. So data loss prevention is going to protect your environment, if you implement it, when you have from transmission and removal. So what does this mean? You set up data loss prevention engine or product, like from Trend Micro or from a variety of different sources. And in the event that someone tries to move data outside your organization, like for instance, they're trying to send a bunch of serial numbers for like your equipment outside the org through email, or copying a massive amount of data from your shared drive to Yahoo or whatever, your DLP engine will fire off and say, this activity is strange. I think you should know about it. It alerts the system administrator and says, hey, this is odd behavior. I don't like it. I see 100 social security numbers moving. I see credit card numbers moving to, outside the org through email, through file copies, through of copying it to USB drives or whatever. And it'll alert you about that. And you give it all these parameters that say, okay, here's our IP, here's social security numbers, here are credit card numbers, here are sensitive data, and it keep a watch on your environment for anything going out, email, anything going out through file copies and so on and so forth, and it will protect you. There are ways also to write code where it won't allow for the movement of data inside your organization. The entity implements controls to prevent or detect and act upon introduction of unauthorized or malicious software to meet the entity's objectives. For the most part, you can just go by like having an EDR product, endpoint detection and response. There are a whole bunch of more layers of this that you could do, like Intune, where you track what's being installed on each person's machine. You could have something called MDM, mobile device management, where you treat all of your endpoints as mobile devices, and it'll keep track of what you're installing or not installing on each device. You could have your RMM tool, remote monitoring management monitoring tool, and that can go through and scan and have an agent on everyone's computer. And if you install something on your computer that you don't like Tetris, for instance, you could flag it and say, okay, if someone installs Tetris or or ransomware on their machine, then I want to know about it. I want you to block it. So there's things called Sentinel-1, CrowdStrike, that will, and like again, Trend Micro again will stop these things from occurring. RMM tools, MDM tools, and stuff like that will also tell you if unauthorized software is being installed on your environment. Also, through the path of least privilege, no end users should really be able to install software on their computers unless they bring their own device. And if you bring your own device, you have a little bit of trouble with that. But you could also install MDM or RMM agent on their computer and see if they're keeping their computer safe. They might install things on there that you don't approve of, but you're gonna have to have that policy from before where you describe a mobile device policy, what is acceptable in your environment. To meet its objectives, the entity uses detection and monitoring procedures to identify changes to configurations that results in the introduction of new vulnerabilities and susceptibilities to newly discovered vulnerabilities. So vulnerabilities are when a piece of software on your operating system is somehow compromised by a hacker and that it'll come up on a list of vulnerabilities that these vulnerability scanners have. So that means you need to have a vulnerability scanner, a vuln scanner. So you do a vulnerability scan of your environment. I do them every month for customers, every quarter. Once you discover the vulnerability, then you patch it. You try to mitigate it by upgrading, updating, and troubleshooting or removing that particular software. Since we've given everyone least privileges, no one really should be installing new software and applications on their computer. But if you have like an engineering department and they need to constantly be installing new software and testing things out and trying new things, what ends up happening is you give a free pass to the engineers, they install a bunch of software on their stuff, and the vulnerability scanner kicks off and says, hey, these engineers have an application on there in their environment that would allow for somebody to compromise it using some hacking technique, and your vulnerability scanner detects it. You're going to want to mitigate that by updating, upgrading, or patching that particular piece of software. Or you might just have a piece of software that you've allowed in your environment that now has a vulnerability, but your vulnerability scanner has detected it, and you can take steps in an immediate fashion to mitigate those issues. So you're going to have a vulnerability scanner. You're normally going to have an RMM tool, remote management and monitoring. You might have mobile device management. So MDM, RMM, and vuln. So you have all three of those pieces of software in your environment, and you're monitoring your environment for vulnerabilities. You have your RMM tool most likely will do patching. So you have a patch management tool. If not, you should get a patch management tool as well. The entity monitors system components and the operation of those components for anomalies that are indicative of malicious acts, natural disasters, and effort errors affecting the entity's ability to meet its objectives. Anomalies are analyzed to determine whether they represent security events. So you have endpoint detection, RMM, MDM, DLP, and all your policies and procedures. You're also running risk analysis, vuln scanning, and you're doing all that. That package meets this requirement that you've done. You're doing all those things, and that in the event here that malicious acts and natural disasters are physical issues, you've already gone over those in your risk analysis, in your you've already got your mitigation process and procedures, and you keep track of these things happening because you have a ticketing system. So you have a ticketing system, and an anomaly occurs, or a malicious act happens, or ransomware occurs. You're going to want to create a ticket for it in your ticketing system and track how it's reacted to, and you're going to, so you have a lot of software now. You have 7 pieces of software here, because you have your ticketing, RMM, DLP, MDM, on and on. So you have a lot of software that are going to help you accomplish these goals, but they're required. And if you don't have them, you have to have them. So get those 7 or 8 pieces of software, because we're going to add more here as well. So we're going to add encryption. You can even get intrusion detection, intrusion prevention. You need a next generation firewall. You need you need your firewall software. You need your identity engine. I mean, you need a lot of different things going on for yourself, that policies and procedures. It's a lot. It's not a small thing to be SOC compliant. And you're basically going to need to have a process, a well-defined process of how people move through your organization, what roles and responsibilities they have, what areas of access they have, what software they can install, how do they access different areas of your environment through permissions, what happens to them when we terminate them, that kind of thing. So that's a lot. Vuln scan, all these different pieces of equipment, software you have to have. But what if you don't even have a facility? Well, you're gonna have to do your best to create and implement that in the cloud. I mean, if you have no facility and you have no cloud, it'd be very difficult to have a business. But yeah, I've seen it actually, where a person will be an individual and they will have no facility, and they'll have no cloud environment. They'll just be a consultant who wants to be SOC 2 compliant. And it's extremely difficult to accomplish that, because you have no physical or network environment. Maybe you just have email for Office 365. Can you become SOC 2 compliant? Pretty much no. I would more push you towards becoming SOC 1 compliant, and where you just have to basically follow rules and guidelines. If you don't even have a board of directors, I doubt you would really could even become SOC 2 compliant. So a lot of these things are for medium and large companies, and SOC 2 compliance costs about $18,000 to $25,000 to accomplish, plus all the back end work that you need to do to enable to just get there. So there's $18,000 for the audit. So I just saw somebody get quoted like $12,000 the other day from an accounting firm. That's the lowest I've ever seen. But normally 18, 20, 25, it depends on the size of your organization too. It's just not something that you do cheaply. It's not something that you do if you're an individual with no environment. You have no physical environment. You have no board of directors. You have no executives. You have no HR department. It's very difficult to become SOC 2 compliant, because there's really no meat on the bone for the auditors to look at. They're going to be like, not applicable everywhere. So, but if it is applicable, you're going to have a lot of software too. And all those different software products cost money as well. So you're going to have a lot of activity to become SOC 2 compliant. Your IT department is going to be very busy implementing controls and policies and procedures, because no IT person I've ever met has had policies and procedures like at this level. All right, is there any questions about SOC 2 compliance so far?
Gregory, you said if they didn't have a board of directors, then they wouldn't be able to get SOC 2. Is that what you said earlier?
It's difficult to get, you don't meet these controls. If you don't meet the control, it's in some scenarios you'll fail. And not having a board of directors is because then you won't have ethics and morals, because the board needs to go over and check and make sure you have ethics and morals. So it's hard to get a yes score on these controls if you don't have it. You can have a board of directors of like 2 people, a president and a board member, but they can't be part of your organization. So I mean, they can't be managers and stuff inside of your company. So yeah, you would get a fail if you didn't have a board of directors, because then you can't have anybody reviewing your policies and procedures. So
So,
I wouldn't
so if
even
you're a
go
if you're a
that
business,
deep.
so what I think I hear you saying, if you're a business and you are trying to go into the vertical where you got to get a SOC 2, you have to go get a board of directors, or you're not gonna
Absolutely.
play in that space.
That's right.
Interesting.
Yeah, you can't I mean, you're gonna fail the SOC 2 because you can't meet the controls. Like, there's 4 controls and 5 controls in here that say your board of directors has to do X, Y, and Z. And if you can't do them, they don't just say, okay, we'll give you a pass on those. They say fail, get a board of directors and have them do these things, or else you can't pass it. And if
So,
you, yeah, go ahead.
well, so in the past, in the other ones where we've had a control where we couldn't meet, where you had made suggestions. Now, maybe this is obviously totally different. I'm just trying to clarify. Where you say, well, we don't have one, but if we did have one, here's what we would do, kind of thing. Or, you can't mark it NA or that kind of thing.
Not in these. No, you can't mark
Got it.
a missing board of directors as NA. Yeah, you can't do it. No. And this is something that you get a seal, certificate for. It's not something you self-acclaim. You go, okay, well, I'm HIPAA compliant or whatever, and you self-assess, you self-attest it. You can't do that here. It's a body, a SOC 2 body. They train you on how to be a SOC 2 assessor. And then the assessor comes in and says, okay, you have to meet these following controls. You have to meet them all. And if you can't meet them, then they fail you and they don't give you the certificate. I mean, you could try to become SOC 2 compliant, but if you don't have the requirements, they're going to just simply not give you the certificate.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Sure. Any other people have any questions? Jeremy, also, you have a lot of resources that we share with people. So if anyone has any questions or anything out of the ordinary, you can ask for Jeremy and we'll come up with something for you. I've gone through this dozens of times, so I can provide you. I have actually a control for every single one of these, but the Lionfish platform also has a lot of processes, policies, and procedures built into it that you can leverage if you need it in order to create that documentation, the policies and procedures. All right, everybody, thanks for coming. Have a great 4 to 3 day weekend. Maybe this was a 4 day weekend, no, and you didn't show up, but this is being taped, and therefore, and Jeremy will make it available. So if you need to listen to it again to understand and access it, please do that. Please listen to it again and enjoy your weekend. Thanks. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.